Okay, I'm horrifically impatient and I don't have a strong belief anybody else is coming, so I think we should just get going. All right, so welcome to Eat Your Vegetables, data security for data scientists. Hopefully everybody here is either a data scientist or is interested in security, or you're in the wrong room. Okay, we'll just get going here. So first, the agenda. Things we're going to talk about today. The agenda, which I know is a little self-referential, but we might as well be complete about this. Then we're going to have a little, introduction. Who am I? Why am I here? All that fun stuff. Then we're going to have a little talk about why you're here. And hopefully I can convince you, if you're not already convinced, that security is both awesome and important. Then we'll get into the real meat of this whole thing, go over some security concepts. This talk is labeled intermediate, mostly because I didn't want to have to define things. So I'm making some assumptions that you know the terminology. If not, I apologize in advance, but there will be time for questions at the end. So help me, I will make sure there's time. Otherwise, you can always find me on Twitter, so we can follow up after the fact. Then we'll go over tools, which is the fun stuff. Anybody can talk about, stuff without actually mentioning solutions, so we'll actually go over tools. And then finally, questions. And just as a preview, all the slides are online, so no need to scribble furiously during the presentation. You'll be able to get all this stuff after the fact. All right, who am I? I'm your speaker. See, it's my costume from Halloween in 2010. I was a speaker. I'm your speaker. It's okay, off to a rough start. I actually mounted a real speaker inside it and hooked up to my phone, so I was playing music all night. It was a fantastic time. My name is Voorhees by trade. I am a software engineer. I don't actually label myself a data scientist on most days. I'm a software engineer. I write boring security software. I've been in the tech industry for about 15 years, give or take. Started out doing mostly like computer repair, then went into like network administration, and then landed the whole software engineering gig. And I am on Twitter, Will2041. I post a ramble of tweets, so follow me if you want. All right, why are we here? The great existential question that we must all face at some point in our lives. But do that on your own time. We're here in this very room to talk about vegetables. Vegetables are awesome. They're tasty. Your mother has always told you to eat more vegetables, and I thoroughly agree with that. You must eat your vegetables. Of course, vegetables are, a stand-in for security. We're actually here to talk about security. Why is security important to you? And I hope to prove to you that vegetables can indeed be tasty. And if anybody remembers Red vs. Blue, this was the opening scene. Any Red vs. Blue fans? Yeah, what? Two? Really? That's it? All right. Homework, everybody go Google Red vs. Blue and watch the first episode. Otherwise, I look like a crazy person with this slide. All right, so the great predicate of everything I'm about to say is that someone wants your data. No, I'm very, very serious about this. Someone wants your data. You might be thinking, well, duh, my data is awesome. Of course somebody wants it. That's well and good. That's probably true. But even if you don't think your data has value, there is somebody out there that thinks your data is valuable. Even Pokemon Go accounts have value to people these days. If you just search on eBay, you can buy a Pokemon Go account. They have monetary value. It's not always monetary, though. Take the 2015 Ashley Madison hack as an example. Anybody not familiar with that? Excellent. I don't have to awkwardly explain it then. That's an example of hacktivism. The goal was not monetary in that situation. So even if your data doesn't have monetary value, there is some value to it. And why should you care? Well, I mean, the obvious stuff is money. About a year ago, Lloyd's Insurance put out an estimate that hacking costs about $400 billion a year. That's a lot of money. Obviously, businesses are very incentivized to not lose that money. Even nonprofits don't want to lose the potential value of their data. So everybody knows about that. I'm not going to go into it. Everybody is familiar with the money thing. But what other reasons might you really care about your data and keeping it safe? Well, compliance. HIPAA, SOX, trade sanctions, government contracts, other business contracts, who knows what. There are plenty of legal requirements out there to keep data safe. If you deal with any sort of data like that, you have a vested interest in security. You might also just care about analytical confidence. Encryption and signing especially can provide a no one touched this guarantee on your data. That's a very nice out-of-the-box benefit of adding security you get for free in a lot of cases. And really it avoids that nightmare situation where you rerun a model on some data, get an entirely different result, and are like, all right, that's great, and then you spend weeks trying to figure out what the devil happened. So security can actually provide that guarantee that somebody hasn't gone in and messed with your data store. It's also really fun. And no, I'm not kidding. I actually enjoy this stuff. Security is basically all about puzzles. Puzzles are fun. There's this concept of red team and blue team in the security world, attackers and defenders. That's basically one big game of capture the flag. That's fun. You might, as a kid, have used the Caesar cipher to pass messages back and forth between friends at school. That's where you take the alphabet and just kind of shift everything by 6 letters or 12 letters and then write out your little code. And honestly, the math behind all this stuff is interesting. If you're a math geek and you've never looked into like what goes into cryptography, look into it. It's actually really neat stuff. Okay, you're giving me sort of blank bored stares. And you're right, you got me. All that was filler. Those are definitely valid reasons to care about security, but honestly, they are not the most important reason to care about security in my book. The most important reason is trust. It's what's for dinner. Honestly, we're data stewards. We deal with massive amounts of data, and people trust us with that data. It doesn't really matter what the data is. Somebody somewhere has trusted you with it. A business might have just trusted you with their financial data. This could be consumer information, health records, who knows what. But as data scientists, we're ultimately responsible for this data. We're the ones working with it every single day. There are not magic information security elves that are going to drop down from the sky during a breach and save our data. We have a vested interest in it, and people have trusted us with it. And trust has a cost. Governments can lose national security. The Office of Personnel Management getting hacked. That was a loss of national security. That wasn't good. E-commerce sites can lose sales. But remember that whole, money thing that $400 billion a year is lost to hacking? A very recent, and I'm talking like a month ago, survey in the Journal of Cybersecurity actually found that businesses spend about as much money defending against hacks as they lose in an event. So from a strict money standpoint, from a business standpoint, it looks like it might almost be a wash in terms of defense versus benefit. So maybe money isn't really the biggest thing here anymore. Maybe human trust is more important. Trust of people is not so nearly easily as quantified. Things like Target, Ashley Madison, they were hacked. They're still in business. Are they doing as well? Maybe, maybe not. And honestly, this is all very murky. We don't actually have a metric yet on how to say, I lost human trust. So, in the absence of hard data on this, I think we should do what's right, protect our data, and protect that trust people have placed in us. So, there you go. That's the spiel about why you should care. Most of you are still here. I only saw one person leave. That's fantastic. Doing good. So, what can we actually do about all this stuff? Well, I've got some good news and I've got some bad news. The good news, there's easy stuff you can do, and it is really, really easy. I'm not kidding. This stuff is super easy. You can add security with very minimal effort. The bad news is there's also some really, really hard stuff. And there, even after you learn it and know it, it's still really, really hard. Think Heartbleed from 2014 for OpenSSL. The OpenSSL maintainers are really smart people. They know what they're doing. And an implementation bug got in there, and now suddenly we had this big Heartbleed event where random memory could be leaked to remote attackers. Encryption keys could get lost, and basically everybody was really, really sad. So even there, great people, but it's hard. It's hard to get right. So let's talk about the easy stuff. And hey, speaking of Heartbleed, you know what you can do that's really great for keeping your system secure? Patch. Yeah, I know, it's a pain in the butt, but proactively patching everything. And notice, the original version of the slide said patch all the servers. Not sufficient. Routers, networking devices, IoT devices, laptops, presenter remotes. Basically everything is going to have a remote vulnerability these days, it seems. So just be prepared to patch everything on your network. And if you're doing it often, that's fantastic. In the best case scenario, you might apply a patch for something, and then a vulnerability is discovered in your old version of whatever package you patched. And hey, you're already protected, no work on your part, good to go. But even if you are in the worst case scenario and some vulnerability is disclosed and gets a bunch of media attention, and then all the hackers like, oh yeah, let's do this thing. If you are patching regularly and continuously, then you know how to do it. You can very quickly get onto your systems and patch the new vulnerability. So patching is just as much about practice as anything else. But beyond patching, some other easy stuff. And again, I very much assert that the easy stuff is super easy. And honestly, the sad fact of the matter is so many companies and organizations have such terrible security that even just doing these few basic things are going to put you in a better security stance than probably half of the companies out there. Easy thing, the first. Access control. This is honestly something that when you're in the security business, you get to a point where you don't feel like you should even need to have to say this, but you do. Don't leave things open to the world. Some restriction is better than no restriction. And so what I mean by this is put permissions on your accounts to only be able to do certain things. Not running with an admin account might seem like a pain, but that can be the difference between your intern deleting your data lake or not deleting your data lake. So weigh those two things accordingly and think about it a bit. Big companies are very much guilty of this. I'm going to use Nissan as an example. So anybody that drives a Nissan, I'm sorry. Anybody that drives a Nissan Leaf, pay attention. It was discovered that the Nissan Leaf has a control system built into it. It can connect to the internet. It will report information about the vehicle, and then will also let you control a few things. So not the important stuff like braking, thank goodness, but minor things like what radio station are you listening to? Is your AC on, or is it blowing heat at you on a 95-degree day? That sort of thing. It turns out that the way Nissan implemented this control system for the Leaf was 100% open to the world. If you knew the VIN number of a Nissan Leaf, you could just get into your web browser, see anything you want about the car, and then start messing with it. No questions asked, just 100% open. That is terrifying. At a minimum, that is just horrible PR for Nissan. Like, anybody from Nissan here? Do I need to worry about legal stuff at this point? Okay, good. This was terrible PR for Nissan. And in the worst case, this could have resulted in loss of life. Fortunately, they did patch it after it got exposed, but it was an independent researcher that discovered this vulnerability. If you just add access control now, you don't have to deal with any of this. All right. TLS, aka SSL. TLS replaced SSL, but everybody calls them the same thing. So if you're ever talking to somebody and they say TLS, they mean TLS. If you're talking to somebody and they say SSL, they probably mean TLS. If they actually mean SSL, that's bad, and you should give them a very stupid look and ask them why they're still using SSL. It's been deprecated for quite a long time. In this talk, though, if I say SSL, I mean TLS, so fair warning on that front. For people that don't know what TLS or SSL is, it provides authentication and encryption on connections. The authentication part comes when you connect to something, so like when you go in your browser and type in https google.com, TLS will give you that assertion, yes, this is indeed Google you're connecting to and not some random attacker. And then the secondary benefit is your connection is automatically encrypted, so any data you pass back and forth, no one just sitting around in the network and see that. So these are some great features to have, not just in web browsing. This applies for servers talking to other servers as well. But historically, TLS has not been used in a lot of places, and the two biggest reasons now fortunately fall into the category of myth and legend. The first one was cost. It used to be you had to buy a certificate from a trusted party to make TLS or SSL work easily. Fortunately, it is 2016, we have entered the modern era, and Let's Encrypt is a thing. Let's Encrypt is a service that actually will give you TLS and SSL certificates completely for free. Yes, Free, zero cost. It's amazing. No longer do you have to pay money to be secure. They also provide some really nice command line tools that make it easy to install certificates and update them on web servers. So if for any reason you're running a web server and you've ever thought to yourself, hey, it'd be really cool if I could add SSL, now you can do it for free. It's really simple, it's super easy, let'sencrypt.org. And I'm a little embarrassed to admit that it wasn't until I was preparing this presentation that the words let's encrypt actually clicked with me as like a command for all of us to begin encrypting. I was like, oh, let's encrypt, that's cool, that's nice. Oh wait, it actually means let's encrypt stuff. Dude, that's awesome. Yeah, my dog looked at me like I was an idiot. The other great myth is performance. For years, people have been like, oh no, I'm not using TLS. That's going to wreck my performance. I won't be able to perform as quickly as my performance can perform. Well, not true. Gmail switched over to SSL, and when they did that, with no special optimizations, this is just like the most naive, flip it on and see what happens sort of thing, they saw less than 1% increase in their average CPU utilization and like milliseconds worth of latency added. So unless you are actually doing some sort of super high performance, high throughput application that can't tolerate that level of additional resource utilization, it's basically free to add TLS to your connections. So highly recommend you give it a shot. Experiment with it, do a benchmark, see if it applies. I bet things are gonna go well for you. Okay, account separation. And yes, I know, an avocado is actually a fruit, but I honestly started getting in, I got a little desperate with the vegetable pictures. So you get avocados, we can deal with it. Account separation. So this is really just the idea of using more than one account. Lots of people are very keen. You'll get one AWS account or one user account in your computer, and you just do everything with that. Cool, awesome, it's simple. It's also a really bad idea. Whole companies have actually been lost, like have gone out of business entirely. I'm thinking of Codespaces here specifically. They had one AWS account for their whole system. Everything was running on one AWS account. Somebody got the keys to their root AWS credentials and deleted everything. All their EC2 instances are gone, all of their buckets were cleared out. And now you might be thinking, wait, what about backups? Oh yeah, they had backups in the same AWS account. So when their S3 buckets got nuked, all of their backups got nuked. And they were out of business in hours. It was horrific. So use separate accounts. It's the concept of limiting blast radius. If one of your accounts gets compromised, the attacker can only do so much. So at a minimum, just have a separate backup account. That way you'll have relatively safe backups. You can go further with this. Your master database user doesn't need write access to your S3 bucket. So use a couple different accounts for that. If somebody gets into your DB, they can't automatically get to all your S3 buckets. And short-lived credentials. I love this one. We were talking about this a little bit before the talk, actually. So just like passwords, there is this strong recommendation that all of your credentials or keys to connect to other services be rotated periodically as well. So I'm sure you're used to hearing the change your password every 90 days. Maybe it's enforced at your company. Same thing with like AWS credentials, API keys, all that stuff. You want to change those periodically. Again, because it limits the blast radius. If somebody does get your AWS credentials, well, they're only valid for 30 days. So they've only got 30 days to mess up your stuff. That's a really long time. So maybe you want your credentials to only be valid for, let's say, an hour. Yeah, that's still kind of a long time. Let's say maybe 15 minutes. Hey, all right, now we're getting somewhere. 15 minutes to actually use credentials and do some real damage starts getting a little bit more tough. So in the AWS land, and I'm sorry, I'm a little bit biased to AWS, so that's kind of my prime example. Lots of the services out there have similar technologies. But in AWS land, there's this thing called Simple Token Service. It is a service that will literally give you short-term credentials. And that's fantastic. You really want these short-term credentials, specifically because devs keep putting those credentials in GitHub. Like all the time. It's terrifying. There was a talk earlier today where somebody popped up a config file, and guess what was at the top of the file? AWS credentials. I could have taken a picture. I could have done anything I wanted on their account. That's not good. If you're using short-lived credentials, you don't need to worry about this as much because by the time somebody gets to exploiting it, they're probably not valid anymore. Specifically with GitHub though, because all that's online, there are people out there that actually run bots that just go through GitHub looking for AWS keys. Just sorting through, as soon as they find some, they spin up a bunch of EC2 instances and start doing some free Bitcoin mining. And then you get a $3,000 AWS bill. I don't think anybody wants that. In the past, AWS has actually been pretty good about not really following through and charging people when that sort of thing happens. But in general, you probably want to avoid that. So use short-lived credentials, reduce your blast radius, and you don't have to deal with Archer memes ever again. All right, we're kind of at the midpoint. Can take a little breather, get a sip of water. Feel free to talk amongst yourselves. Ooh, question.
I just had a friend who got a $30,000 AWS bill that way.
All right, confirmation from the crowd that those bills happen.
Very kindly, but you know, you put things on GitHub and it would, like, you took it down a minute later, but there were bots, so.
Yeah, there you go. See, I'm not just some crazy person rambling. She knows. Listen to her. Okay, so at this point, I've just been spouting general security stuff. We're at PyData for a reason. There's probably some questions about data specifically. So let's talk about that stuff. First up, signatures. I kind of teased this a little bit earlier by saying you can have a no one messed with this guarantee. Signatures are the way to do that. Signatures are kind of the complement to encryption. Encryption will hide data. Signatures gives you the ability to verify data. You might also be very familiar with hashes. So what's the difference between signing and hashing? Signing actually proves identity. So with a hash, a common example of this is like you'll see an MD5 sum on a website with an ISO file for like an Ubuntu install or something. If a hacker gets on there, they can actually overwrite the whole file, generate a hash, and just update the website with their hash. So everything looks completely legit, but it's not. Somebody's messed with the data. Using a signature, there is a secret key that gets thrown into the mix. So unless the attacker also knows the secret key, they cannot generate a valid signature for whatever malicious data they've put on there. So this is really great. And if you attach signatures to your data or to any of like any sort of like analysis you've done on the data, you can actually have over time this guarantee that nothing has been messed with. So it's really great. But speaking of encryption, encryption, it solves everything. We're done. No, I'm obviously kidding. That's not true at all. People love to think that encryption is the end-all, be-all of security. Slap some encryption on it. Oh yeah, I've got, got some data I want to keep safe for there. Slap some encryption on it. I'm good. Yeah, no, it's not easy. We're definitely getting into the this is really hard part of the conversation now. Encryption is difficult to do right. There are actually a couple of concepts in encryption: confidentiality and integrity. Confidentiality is just that hidden data thing. So you don't want anybody to see your data. All right, they can't see it, you've got confidentiality. Integrity is you don't want anybody to mess with your data. Or if they do, you want to know about it. And even in just the encryption world, AES, Advanced Encryption Standard, just using AES to encrypt something may or may not provide integrity depending on which mode you use. So if that's super confusing, now you know why this is hard. You have to be very specific in your encryption to make sure it's done right. And unfortunately, there's way more to this than I could ever cover in this talk. So I'm afraid that if you want to learn about the specific ins and outs and guts of the various encryption schemes, you're going to have to go to Google, you're going to have to read some books. Cryptography Engineering Design Principles and Practical Applications comes highly recommended for sort of a boots on the ground, more practical approach to using some of these schemes. So you'll have to go check into that on your own because there are a few other challenges we need to talk about. Encrypted data is a pain. It's always going to be slower. It's just the state of the world. Some tools are just absolutely going to freak out at the thought of trying to deal with encrypted data. Bye-bye grep, cat, basically anything you use on the command line, it's not going to work on encrypted data. So really, we have to work with unencrypted data. But the trick is we need to work with it in a safe, controlled way. So once you've got your encrypted data pulled down from wherever it's stored, decrypt it because you're going to have to work with it. There are very, very few tools that will work directly with encrypted data. They do exist. Again, Google, I'm not going to go into it too much. But most simplistically, if you just decrypt your data and work with it, all right, that's awesome. The tooling question goes away. But here are the tricks. One, keep it unencrypted for as short of a time as possible. As soon as you're done with it, throw it out. Delete it. Get on memory or just re-encrypt it. Do whatever. Just get rid of it as soon as you're done using it. Do everything you can to avoid writing it to disk. Logging especially is the biggest trap in the world for data. If you log stuff, you could accidentally be logging unencrypted sensitive data, and now it's in your log system. Is your log system encrypted? Probably not, so watch out for that sort of thing. Tooling can help with this, but it requires effort. And we're going to talk about tooling, and we're going to talk about some of the effort required. But remember back to that whole thing about how companies can go out of business if they're lax on security? Keep that in mind. A little bit of investment into tooling to prevent massive data breaches or complete company collapses is probably worth it, assuming you like where you work. And if not, then I guess not. But at least think about it. Key management is also a pain. More data actually equals more keys. This is kind of a new concept to some people. As you're encrypting stuff, new data should eventually start using new keys. Again, we go back to that concept of blast radius. If an encryption key has been leaked, do you want that to mean all of your data is visible? Or maybe only half your data, a quarter of your data, maybe even just one piece of data gets leaked if an encryption key goes rogue. So over time, you should actually be changing up your encryption keys, encrypting new data with it. But this means that because you probably want to access old data, now you have to keep an ever-growing set of keys around to be able to encrypt new data and decrypt the old data when you need it. Also, don't keep your keys next to your encrypted data. One S3 bucket with a bunch of like data file.encrypted, key for data file. That doesn't help anybody. Keep your encrypted data somewhere else with your keys. 2 separate S3 buckets is great. And then the real trick to this whole thing is when you're keeping keys in a different place, you need a pointer to them so you don't forget. If you just have an S3 bucket full of blobs with no reference to what key was used to encrypt it, okay, good luck. That's a rough situation to be in. Fortunately, like S3 actually provides the ability to attach metadata to every blob you upload. That metadata is a great place to put a reference to the key. So you can say, hey, I use key serial 4 to encrypt that data. Yeah, so key management is a pain. Have I bummed you out yet? Are you sad? Yes. I'm seeing some smiles, but mostly sad faces. And yes, I realize that's not a vegetable. This is an aside. If you search for the term vegetable on Flickr, that image has the vegetable tag. So tag appropriately, please. You'll make presenters way happier not finding pig pictures. Okay, pigs aside, what can we actually do about this stuff? So remember those few tips. Do decrypt your data, but be safe about it. Don't keep it around. Get rid of the unencrypted version as quickly as possible. Don't log it anywhere. Watch out for that stuff. If you can, split it up. What are the odds you're going to have your entire data set loaded in at any given time? If you're only dealing with a few fields in your data set, actually slice the data in two. Keep one set here, and then the amount of encrypted data you're dealing with goes down by half just instantly. So there are some strategies there depending on what you're doing. You might be able to only encrypt part of your data to work with at any given time. You might just be able to work with metadata instead of actual data. That could be an option. That's fantastic. You're seeing a theme here. Getting encryption out of the picture makes your life easier, but at the expense of, now you're not using encryption. But then, use the tools. And that's what we're going to move into now. Tools! Everybody loves tools. And fortunately, we're not alone in this. There are lots of people out there that are very, very interested in security. So there are people out there that will help you with tooling. The only thing I can really say on some tooling is do not roll your own crypto. That's the term for writing up your own encryption library or scheme. You might think it's great to encrypt something twice. Yeah, well, there are certain cases where actually encrypting something twice makes it less secure than encrypting something once. So try to stick to the standards. Don't come up with your own schemes. We'll all be happier for it. But some high-level tools. So there's this new thing, JWT, JSON Web Token. It's kind of new. It's mostly for server-to-server communication stuff. But it's really nice because the standards provide great ways to do encryption on JSON. Or JSON if you prefer. And yes, my last name is Voorhees, Jason Voorhees, Friday the 13th. I've heard it all. We don't need to go into it. And then there's this specifically Python, and I don't know how they want to say this, Jose or Jose. JOSE is JavaScript Object Signing and Encryption, and they specifically implement some of the JWT features. Now this does signing, but not actually encryption. So it's sort of imprecisely named, but that whole, nobody has touched this data guarantee I was talking about, if you've got a bunch of JSON sitting around and you just want to throw a signature on it, this library makes it really, really simple. Like really simple. Like that's it. That's how you generate a signature with this. Yeah, so the AB is the bit that's getting signed for anybody that doesn't spot that. So super easy tool. But that's really high level. What if we want to do this powerful, deep security encryption stuff? We got a couple of options on that too. PyCrypto and PyOpenSSL. This is very low level, so we're kind of stepping down the stack on this stuff. These both provide all the basic cryptographic primitives you need to do literally anything. Like, these are the power lifters of the Python security library world. Just the world is your oyster. You can encrypt, you can sign, you can just go nuts with these. They expose all sorts of different encryption schemes, different key generation techniques. You can do TLS stuff with this, work with certificates, public-private key stuff, asymmetric, symmetric encryption. Like, the feature list is just gigantic. But they're also terrifying. I wouldn't want to touch either of these with a 10-foot pole. They're scary. They give you too much power. It's too easy to mess stuff up. So let's go back up the stack a little bit and find something a bit more human-friendly. Cryptography! It's so perfectly named, I can't even begin to tell you. This is actually a package that's written by the same people that do PyOpenSSL, so they know what they're doing. And the goal here is to have human-friendly cryptography. So if you want to encrypt some data, that's it. It's like 4 lines, like it's nothing. This is pretty secure. This will use AES 128-bit keys under the hood, which is basically the de facto standard for cryptography, so it's very secure. And it's super simple. You've got a key that you just need to store somewhere you don't keep your encrypted data, mind you, and then your token is your encrypted data. So that's it. Like, this stuff is super easy, and this is a fairly secure solution. Unless you've got very specific regulatory reasons to use different crypto schemes, this will do a great job of getting you on the security board. Okay, I feel like I need to talk about pickles just because they're so popular, and I like pickles. But you need to be very, very, very careful with pickles. See how I got silent and dramatic there? Pickles are an exploit waiting to happen. This is an example from Travis Cunningham. I know it's reduced, but I'm just going to call it the unpickle method because it's easier to think about for me. That will actually execute code. So when you unpickle this, it does subprocess popen and lists out whatever contents of the directory you're in. If this was a malicious pickle, it could do anything it wants to your box. So that's scary. Fortunately, there are some very easy mitigations. Sign your pickles. There's that signing thing again. Unless you're putting remote code exploitations in your pickles for some reason, when you generate a pickle, sign it, validate that signature before actually unpickling it, you're good to go. And also use TLS when sending pickles around. It makes your life easier. So I'm going to try to speed through this real quick because I'm running out of time and I really want to make sure there's time for questions. But I would be remiss if I didn't at least briefly discuss providers. I talked a little bit about some AWS stuff. Unfortunately, these examples are going to be AWS oriented again. But hey, lots of different providers have similar capabilities and features, so just look around the documentation for your preferred cloud provider or not cloud provider as the case may be, and you'll probably find something very similar. Server-side encryption is a very nice feature that S3 provides where it will encrypt your data with a key that it manages before it puts it on a hard drive somewhere. This is great for regulatory compliance that says you must encrypt your data at rest. You can literally add a bucket policy to your S3 bucket, and any put is automatically encrypted and saved. Any get is decrypted and then returned to you. So it's great for checking off boxes on a form. It does mean you're still trusting Amazon with all of your keys though, and Amazon does have the ability to look at your data. So maybe that's okay, maybe it's not, you'll have to think about it, but it is an option. If you're really paranoid though, you want to use client-side encryption. Nice little S3 library. This will actually do the encryption of your data before it gets sent to S3. So you give it a key and some data, it encrypts it, and then sends it off to S3. S3 does not see your data. It cannot decrypt it for you. If the data gets pulled out via an attacker, they have encrypted blobs. They can't do anything with it. The only problem I have with this is that it's not as feature-rich as I'd really like. If you actually look at the Amazon-provided Java Amazon S3 encryption client, the feature set there, oh, it is great. Now that's a library. And it makes me so sad to say that, but the feature set in the Java library they provide is fantastic. So while this is a great start, we can do better. And this is actually a great proof of concept that you can actually combine the Bodo library and these low-level cryptography libraries and get very, very powerful tooling out of the deal. And if you can build security into the tools and make it as transparent as possible, it makes everybody happy. Last thing I'll talk about, key management service. Key management service is an Amazon service that does all of your key management. It's very well named. Basically, if you need a key, it gives you a key. If you need to get a key to decrypt some data, it gives you the appropriate key. That's it. You can wrap that around your data accessor library, and now all of your encryption is 100% transparent. Again, the Java SDK is more full-featured. It is what it is. Okay, so very quickly, because I'm running out of time and this is crammed full of very interesting stuff. Remember, security is important. Trust is literally priceless, so for no other reason, do this because people trust you with their data. Do the basics. They're better than nothing. Python does have a ton of security tools, way more than I mentioned here. Go check it out. Google around a bit, Google Python security, and you'll get a ton of results. And providers can help. And if a provider doesn't have a security feature you want, talk to them. They probably have lots of customers asking for it, and your input will make it more likely they'll provide that for people in the future. Okay, I'm done. I know you're thinking, thank goodness he is done with this whole thing. He's done speaking. I do want to thank you. This is the first time I've done a presentation like this. This is my inaugural presentation. So you guys have been great. Thank you very much. I also need to just talk about District Data Labs. You're probably hearing about them a lot this weekend. They are a data science research group based out of DC. I'm actually from the West Coast. They're my East Coast compatriots. They're doing talks in this room all day tomorrow at 11:30, 1:15, and 3 on various topics. So I recommend coming out, listening to them talk about all that fun stuff they're working on. All right, and that's it. Slides are already online. There's the bit.ly link, but if you don't trust it because it's a bit.ly link and who knows where it's going, this is the full URL. Good luck. I didn't have any say in what it was. Yeah, so let us go out on a high note with some questions. Go ahead, don't be shy. Oh, yes.
So this example of this cryptography library, let's say I generate the key saying it's encrypted, it uses the current standard byte, right? And then 1 year later I want to decrypt it. The standard will be different.
Yes. So the question was, what happens if I use one of these cryptography libraries and it uses a given encryption scheme, and then a year later I go to decrypt my data and the standard encryption scheme has changed. I've upgraded the package and it's doing something different. Now, unfortunately, I'm not 100% sure on this, so take it with a grain of salt. But if they're doing things right, there's this concept of envelope encryption, where you can attach metadata about how the encryption was done to the encrypted blob. So in that situation, the scheme that was used for the encryption is available for whatever library is handling the decryption scheme. And as long as they haven't changed their interface horribly substantially, it should still be able to fall back to an older scheme. At that point, you might want to ask yourself if you then want to re-encrypt it with a newer scheme and generate new data. But by and large, a lot of libraries will be good about the backwards application like that. And it's totally doable. I just can't give you a firm yes that these libraries do that. Any other questions? Oh, yes.
Just a scenario you had with the client-side encryption with AWS or sending it to, like, say, S3. You can't really do that if you're uploading to RDS or Redshift.
Yeah, so the question is, the example of encrypting data before putting it in S3, and the observation you can't really do it with some things like RDS, Redshift. Yeah, that's very true. A lot of services in Amazon do not know how to deal with encrypted data appropriately. There is more and more integration happening with the key management service I talked about and these services that will do encrypted data, but only internally. So the ingestion to the system has to be unencrypted, but then internally it will use KMS to encrypt it. So it's encrypted at rest, but you have the question of how do I get it in there securely? And so there are things like TLS, maybe it's capable of reading from an encrypted S3 bucket. A few different options on that front. Okay, that's time. So thank you very much.